Hello, Year 8. My name is Mr. Blackwell, and today we will be going through Lesson 8, Global Warming, Causes and Effects. So, could you write down title and date for today, please, and pause the screen, and then you can resume it when you have finished. Brilliant. So, here are 4 photos. I want you to take a moment, have a look at them, and then write down your first thoughts and feelings. So pause this video, have a look, write down about what you think and feel about them. It can be bullet points, it can be feelings, it can be what you think they mean, anything you want. So pause the video, we'll carry on in a minute. Brilliant, there we go. So, on to the next one. Today, all of you will draw a diagram to show how global warming happens. Most of you will make a detailed mind map about the effects of global warming, and some of you will be able to begin some self-directed learning based on the interests within this topic. So, it's really important to begin with to be able to explain what some of these words mean. They tend to be used interchangeably, so some people will use climate change, global warming and the greenhouse effect as if it's all the same thing, and it isn't. So, here are the definitions. The greenhouse effect is the natural process that warms the Earth's surface by the atmosphere and gases within it, trapping some of the heat and reflecting part of the sunlight. So it traps some of it, it lets some of it in, it reflects some of it away. Fantastic. Global warming is in the regards to global temperatures rising, mainly due to the increase of greenhouse gases within the atmosphere. And climate change is a wider term. It's used to describe changes within a climate, usually within one place, and this relates to average temperature and precipitation. So they're not all the same thing, but they kind of dip into one another slightly, especially with the greenhouse effect. So we're going to be looking into that in a little bit more detail today. If you can, pause the screen and write down what these are in your book if you're not sure. We will be using them later, and it's really important for revision later. So pause the screen if you need to, and we'll carry on in a moment. Fantastic. So let's look through this. The difference between greenhouse effect and global warming. So the greenhouse effect happens naturally. That's the first thing to be saying. The greenhouse effect allows us to live here in the first place. The greenhouse effect is used with our atmosphere. It is the process of the sun's energy being allowed in, but also some of it being reflected away. So we don't get the full brunt from the sun, and it also means that we get to kind of have a regulated temperature. We're quite lucky with heat in this sense as well, because if you're facing the sun, it doesn't get too hot, and on the dark side of the planet at night time, it doesn't get too cold. That's because of the greenhouse effect. The gases within the atmosphere allow the temperature to stay regulated. So those gases in the atmosphere keep some of the heat inside, but also reflect some of it away. It effectively acts like a greenhouse, like the name, or an easier way I think of it is like a duvet on a bed. So we'll keep on coming back to these terms later, but it's really important that you have to kind of visualize it to be able to make sense. Either a duvet or a greenhouse. The greenhouse gases in the atmosphere trap some of the heat. So you may know some of the names of these. Carbon dioxide, water vapour, methane, nitrous oxide, CFCs, we'll come on to that in a minute, and ozone. So all of these are big trigger words, you've probably heard them all before, but they all kind of work together to be able to form this barrier between us and space. So global warming tends to be when there's too many of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the Earth gradually gets too hot within our protective layer. But the greenhouse effect is the natural occurrence of this. So, if you want to pause this and take down some notes, then we'll carry on. Brilliant. So, greenhouse effect is natural, and the global warming, we'll get into it now. So, where do these gases come from? These are the main contributors. So contributors are the people who produce the most amount of it. This is we can see this in daily life. So if we look at the bottom left, we can see nitrous oxide, N2O. So that comes from cars, it comes from factories, and you think about how many cars you see in the UK, you see how many cars are around the world. Nearly everybody has one or has access to one. So we're able to see it being produced consistently around the world. That's not brilliant. Also, if we look up, we can see CFCs. So this is a little bit before your time. This is chlorofluorocarbons. These were really dangerous, and they were in the 50s, 60s, 70s, where they were used in producing fridge freezers, and they were used in aerosol cans. They were used everywhere at the time, and they were kind of like the miracle product for these devices. But we didn't realise they were really harmful to the atmosphere, so they ended up becoming outlawed. Extremely dangerous at the time, but we didn't know it, and it took a while for us to know. Carbon dioxide, again, it's produced by cars, but it's also produced by industry. If you look at all-purpose soluble plant food, that all-purpose plant food should be at the bottom left next to the cars. That is fertilizer. So nitrogen is fertilizer, and when it gets wet, when it gets into the atmosphere, it turns into nitrous oxide, and that's when it can go up into the atmosphere. So that's used in agriculture. Methane, CH4, is used in tips, landfills, cattle. They tend to pass quite a lot of wind, and that's a prime example of it's all around us. There's a lot of contributors to these greenhouse gases, and it's really important. If you would like, you can pause the video and take these down as bullet points, so these will be quite important. I've put up photos of these. If you want, you can draw them, or you can write down what you see. If you do, I'd write down the fertilizer, which is the green and yellow box called all-purpose. That should be down in nitrous oxide. So that's my mistake. Pause the video, write them down in bullet points, or draw some pictures, and then we'll carry on. Fantastic. So let's move on. So we can all see that these gases are being created all around us, almost in every single country around the world, and we all have some part to play in it. We all produce waste, we all have vehicles or access to vehicles, we all use aerosol cans or fridge freezers, and we all consume power. So that's a really big part to it. Right, so what you need to be doing is turning your page landscape so it's wider than it is tall, and then you need to be able to draw the sun, that's in the top right, and then the earth in the bottom left. I'll pause the video right now, and then we will resume once you finish drawing that, and then we can explain how the greenhouse effect happens and how global warming is being affected by that. Brilliant. So let's have a look at a diagram. This diagram looks really complicated, but we'll break it down and make it a little bit easier. So as you can see, nitrous oxide in the factory, right at the top over here, you've got the cow with the methane, a little bit smelly. You've got the lynx with the CFCs, those are the dangerous chemicals, and the carbon dioxide coming from cars. All of these, we see these every day. These are everywhere. These are big contributors. So we'll start at number one. Number one is the solar radiation entering our atmosphere. So it's coming in. It comes through the layer of greenhouse gases. Because that layer isn't too big, it lets some in, it lets the majority in, or it lets some of it in, it kind of reflects some of it away as well. It's a happy medium at the moment. But the solar radiation reflects off the Earth back out to space, but is now weaker and cannot pass through the layer of greenhouse gases. So that layer of greenhouse gases that will get thicker and thicker due to the cars, the CFCs, the livestock and factories, this layer will get thicker. Think of it as a thicker duvet when you're in bed, and you just keep on getting hotter and hotter and hotter. That's kind of what it's like. So, number two, this heat radiation or solar radiation can't be pushed back out into space. That's a big problem. And then there's too much solar radiation trapped in our atmosphere, causing the planet to heat up. So originally this one layer, the greenhouse layer of gases, that was a little bit like a really thin duvet, where if it's warm inside your bedroom, the heat can get through your duvet to you. But eventually, if that duvet gets too thick, instead of you warming up nicely, you end up getting too hot, And that's the problem where us contributing extra greenhouse gases into the atmosphere makes that layer of greenhouse gases thicker, and it prevents some of the heat escaping and some of the heat coming in. And we gradually just get warmer and warmer and warmer. And that is the problem. And that results in global warming. So the greenhouse effect is natural, but we're adding to it and making it quite extreme. So pause the video and make sure you've got all of these written down. And if you have any questions about this, make sure you do put it in the chat. It's really important. So pause the video here. Brilliant. So let's move on. Right now, you need another page, once again. I think this is going to be between half a page and a full page, depending on how big your handwriting is, how big the handwriting is. But underneath this video, you will see there is another, about a 5-minute clip. That 5-minute clip or 5-minute video will have information that relates to this. So write this in the middle of your page by here, effects of global warming as the centre, and then we'll make a spider diagram with bits coming off. So write this down in the middle and watch the video, then come back, and then we'll go through it together. So pause this, go watch the video, then come back, and we'll carry on. Brilliant. So this is the diagram I made earlier. If you want to start on your own, you can start and then come back. If you want to do it with me, let's do it now. So here we go. Pardon my handwriting, it's not very good, but let's go through colours one by one. Effects of global warming in the middle. So we'll start at 12 o'clock by going up with the green. So global warming. As the global temperature is increasing, there will be less rainfall in some areas. It doesn't sound like a big issue, but it is, because there will be droughts. Droughts are when there's less water available, where nobody can get water. You can't use water for animals or crops or livestock, and then they begin to die. So people in that area aren't able to get food, and then either they get really sick and they die, or they leave. So entire areas or entire groups of people will leave areas because they can't grow food anymore. Alternatively, where they could get clean water, now they may not be able to. So they have access to dirty water, contaminated water, or what we call grey water. All of these things can lead to diseases such as cholera, diarrhea, dysentery, and polio. None of these diseases have good outcomes. They're all terrible. They have horrible effects to the human condition. So, not very good. If I were you, I'd pause the video and then write these down, and then we'll move on to blue. So pause the video, carry on when you're ready. Brilliant. So we're working our way around like a clock. So we'll go to the blue side. Rising temperatures across the world. This is a big issue because it has better conditions for region-specific diseases. So some diseases we don't have in northern Canada where it's extremely cold because we don't have some animals that can transfer the diseases, such as malaria, as you can see down here. Malaria or Zika virus or dengue fever. All of these are in subtropical areas. So all of these are only where it's really hot and really humid. But as the global temperatures increase, that humidity layer will increase with the temperature. So suddenly you'll have mosquitoes being able to travel a lot further than what they did before, and it'll affect people who haven't learned how to live with them. It'll have huge effects. So pause this when you're ready, and then we'll move on to the red one. Brilliant. So we're carrying on moving like a clock. Now to the red. Ice caps melting and rainforests die or get cut down. This is a huge issue because the ice caps actually reflect quite a lot of sunlight away as well. A lot of that white layer is able to keep a lot of the heat away and a lot of the sun's radiation away. But with that leaving, it means that the Earth will be absorbing more heat, which then will get trapped, and then we end up getting into a bit of a spiral. So habitats are lost for animals and indigenous people. So if you currently live in Wales and there's loads of beautiful green fields, and eventually it gets too hot to where the soil dries out a little bit, or you're not able to get as much water, suddenly the fields won't be as green anymore, and you won't be able to have as many animals there. And eventually habitat loss for everybody involved. But when you look to more remote places where there are indigenous people, like certain areas of South America, they may have to leave because the conditions will be uninhabitable. It won't be safe for them. They won't be able to carry on eating. Species extinction, some of the animals that people eat may leave, or their food won't be available, and then food chains can suffer or collapse. Extremely dangerous. This can happen. This has happened in other places around the world. When you take one animal out of a food chain, it has huge effects, and it can result in all sorts of unintended consequences. Loads of things that we didn't realise could have happened will happen by removing one animal out of a food chain. It's really serious. So pause this, and then you can write this down, and then we'll carry on to yellow. Brilliant. So now we're moving on to yellow, carrying on like the clock. So ocean temperatures rising. That's also not a very good thing. So it kills coral bleaching. That's happening at the moment on the east side of Australia, where the Great Barrier Reef is slowly dying. It's quite stark. It affects a lot of the Australian people. It affects a lot of the biodiversity. So a lot of the different animals that live there, including the food chains that rely on hunting by the coral reef. They're not able to do that anymore. So then what you used to have with really beautiful, vibrant areas of sea life is suddenly gone. And it'll happen really quickly. It also means hurricanes and storms get worse. So how does ocean temperature increase hurricanes and storms? Well, when storms are over the land and then they come over to the water, if the water's cold, it doesn't really make the storm that much worse. If the water's hot, it actually charges up the hurricane or the storm, makes it spin faster, makes it carry more energy. Extremely dangerous. It can hurt people, it can kill people, it can cause huge amounts of disaster. It can cause disasters within an area, and we'll move on to how that has happened now in the blue. So if you want to pause this, you can write down the yellow, and then we'll move on. Brilliant. So if we look on the blue, so carrying all the way around to about where 9 o'clock would be, over by here, ice caps beginning to melt. So these two are definitely related, but have different effects. So sea levels are rising. This is a huge issue because the coastal areas will flood, like Florida, New York, Cardiff, Swansea. Most big places, most cities, especially the older cities, they were settled or developed next to a river because it was the easiest way to get trade. And suddenly, when you start having sea level rising, a lot of these really expensive areas, a lot of these areas where the majority of the populations will live, start being flooded. If you look at Wales, the majority of people live in South Wales. They'll live right by the sea, everybody's really close. If you start having the sea level rising, it affects everybody's way of life. People will have to move eventually. So, some of the bigger consequences. Old infrastructure can fail. Infrastructures like dams or sea defences, sea walls, even bridges, a lot of these things can actually fail. And that's what happened in New Orleans, where some old sea defences weren't being repaired because they didn't believe that storms could get worse, but because of ocean temperatures rising, a lot of these different issues combined together and made a really big, serious storm, a hurricane, that ended up destroying homes because it was more powerful than they expected. And then people who can leave will leave. Then you end up getting human migration across different areas. People who can afford to leave, they will leave. But then the people who can't afford to leave will stay. and it actually affects job supply. It affects people's standard of living. It affects a lot of different things. And all of this is being caused because of global warming. And it might carry on getting worse in the future. So pause this screen and make sure you've got all of these points written down. If you have extra points, please do add to it and try and fill up your page as much as you can. So pause the screen and we'll resume after. Brilliant. So on to the next one. If you did manage to finish in time, you can move on to this. So you need to pick one of these two. The first one is search for CFCs and see what they did to the ozone layer. Explain this in your own words and aim for 1 to 2 paragraphs. I'll give you a hint about that. It affected people in Australia, and it has something to do with sunburn. So have a look at that. That's really interesting. Or alternatively, or as a different one, you can search for the temperature differences between the light and dark side of Venus and Mars. The reason why I've chosen Venus and Mars is because those are the 2 planets either side of us. And what you should try and look for is why there's such a large difference between the light side and the dark side of the planet, and why that doesn't happen to us. Really important, and it's really exciting to hear about. But try and explain it in your own words. And here are some useful websites for you if you did manage to get this far. There we go. So, excellent work. Our next lesson will be looking at some of the real world statistics that we have to be able to show that global warming is taking place. So, enjoy your work, and I'll see you next lesson. Thank you.